In this one, we're going to be continuing off where we left off in the last video with our web scraping. And I kind of left you with the idea of this location stuff. So how do we actually solve this location? In fact, what we need to think about is how to reverse engineer how we actually do our lookups. That is, how do we do a search on the Yelp database? And of course, we're not going directly to the database. We are instead going to the website, pulling the data from the website, and then turning that into some sort of lookup that we want. Now, of course, keep in mind that this is not the preferred method of working with Yelp's data. They have an API that actually allows you to do all sorts of really cool things. Instead, what we're trying to do here is show you how to do web scraping, and Yelp's website happens to be very good for doing that, or at least for us to learn on. So now let's go back to the task at hand, and that is we want to update our locations. We want to change the way our location looks up so all of our other data, like this stuff, is different based on what we input here. So what we know from just the Paris one, and then if I change this to another place like Tokyo, notice that the location changes a little bit. It adds a few things to this. Let's actually try something where I get rid of the middle portion, the Japanese itself, and just put Tokyo, Japan. Now, it looks like it probably will give me the same results, and it does. Right, so this is actually going off of this query right here. Now, in order for you to actually figure this out, it's just a matter of playing with it and noticing the pattern. Now, the next pattern I'd want to notice is, let's try New York. And notice it adds New York, and then it added United States. So it seems that it's going city, like state or country, maybe more additional information. It just looks like it's adding a bunch of different information to the end of it, which is cool. So if I got rid of United States here, for example, and did a search, let's get rid of that comma even, it still actually comes up with some sort of data. It might not be the same data necessarily, but more than likely it's going to be. So we already know a few things here now. We can update our URL to, let's get rid of that part, and we now see that this is the base URL. So let's go back in here, and we see this is the base, right? Right here is the base. The description, we are looking for restaurants, so we're going to stick with restaurants. Of course, you could play around with the other sorts of things under find, but for now, we're just going to stay here. And that's what we're going to call this now, our base URL. And with our actual URL, so we'll say URL equals to, or excuse me, we want to say city, or rather location, because it says find underscore loc. That's probably standing for location. I'm going to say New York and comma New York. I'm going to try that as our location. Now, of course, we will eventually change this most likely, but let's keep it at that. And now let's put our new URL together. We'll say base URL plus loc. Very simple, not a whole big deal. So now we can just test all this stuff out. I'm going to go ahead and copy this here, go into the terminal, paste it, press enter, and we get our status code of 200. So it worked. If we tried to get our links, we could go ahead and add some beautiful soup there. And then we can go through all of the data. And granted, the data, if we parsed it even further, we might be able to see more of this data and understand what's going on with the links, but that's not really the important part here. It's more of the location and all that. So what if I wanted to change it to another city? Again, let's go to actually where I am, which is Newport Beach, and I'll do Newport, California. Notice there's spaces in here, and we'll try all of this again. Just gonna copy all of it, paste it in, and it looks like it worked. Again, hard to know for sure because we don't know what's going on with the data. That's something we'll get more of shortly. The next thing I want to do is I want to figure out the number of pages, right? So how do pages work here? Because if I scroll down, I only see that there's 10 results. So if I click on the next page, I now see that there's the next 10. And I also noticed that this was added, so and start. And if I keep going, I should continue to see the page numbers changing. So that's good. So I can also say page equals to, let's just say 0. And then our base URL, oh, whoops, let's update this. Our requested URL will be plus, and it's start instead of page. So we'll do and start equals, and then we'll plus the page number. But since the page is an integer, since it's an integer right there, we could either write it as a string, or we could just ensure that it's a string by doing str and converting that into a string. Now we can try this again. Easily, we could just exit out of here and do Python again, and then copy this whole thing, paste in, and press enter. Looks like everything's working just fine. So now what I want to do is actually parse the data. Let's parse the data a little bit further so it's not so clearly just getting some requests, because for all we know, this could be a did not find page, but it still has a ton of links on it. We don't know if this is the actual data or the correct data. So that's what we're going to do now. We actually are going to get, or at least look for, the correct data. Now, something about this find all function is really cool, is we can actually take it another step further. In fact, we can add the dictionary in here, and we can add a class. So if we added a class and some specific class name, we can do all sorts of stuff in this. So let's actually take a look at what I mean. But instead of anchor tags, we'll do something different. I'm going to go ahead and look in, inspect this whole area where I have an actual listing, right? So if I go into inspect element and I see in the code here, so inspect element is right click or control click and inspect. Most web browsers will have this. Some of them you might have to activate it. Chrome, I think, has it activated by default. So this brings you up to showing you the actual HTML code, much like what the source shows you, so view source, right? But it actually shows you directly given the element. So you can actually learn a lot about any of these elements, and this is how you can learn and practice and play around with CSS. So I could say color equals to green, and I can play around with all sorts of stuff here, right? Kind of hard to mess around with right now just because there's a lot of other stuff going on, and that's not really the point. But the point here is to find the block of data that's in here. So the block that we have, if I keep scrolling through here, I'll see eventually there's some sort of data. So I see it, regular search result, right? So regular search result looks like it's the data. If I close that down, I see all of these list elements. So li has regular search result. Perfect. That's the class. So it's a list element, and the class is regular search result. So what does that mean? We can go back into our Yelp find all call, and we can say, instead of a, we can say list element. Okay, so I'm actually going to add this to the bottom, all this stuff. So we have our old code still there. Of course, this is the only exception, or these things are the only exception that has changed. And now I'm going to go ahead and just enter all of these things down because we don't need to see those anymore. Okay, so let's go ahead and print out. We still want beautiful soup though, so let's bring that back up. Okay, so we want to print out Yelp soup find all, and it's a list element, so we could do li. So let's go ahead and try that one out first. And we find all list elements. And there's all of our list elements. There's a lot in there. You know, we even see footer and stuff like that. So we want to add our class in there. So we use a dictionary value, and we say class, and then it's going to be the class name. So going back into Chrome, the class name was a regular search result. You don't actually have to know anything about HTML to really understand how this is working. I mean, it helps for sure, but all we did here was say, oh, what's the name on this element? And that's an L and an I. I don't need to know what that element means. I just know that that's the one that has all the stuff in it. And then I see something called class, and it's equal to that. So that's what we're doing here. That's it. So let's go ahead and try that again. I'm going to go ahead and copy the top part here, and we'll paste that in. Of course, it's got to do the actual request. Then we put into beautiful soup, and I had a little mistake here. This should be a comma, not a period. Nice little syntax error there. And I actually don't need to do the request again because I already did the request and I already have the HTML in my local memory. So I can try this one more time. And now I get my list elements just a little bit better. But this is still giving me a lot of data. A lot of data that I don't necessarily want to parse through at this time. Instead, what I really want to do is just see all of the titles. I want to make sure that my titles are changing, and that's it. And then we'll work our way backwards to get all of the other data that we might want. So if we inspect the element on that, we see that we got an A class with biz name and then some other stuff. So we could use biz name or js-analytics-click. js-analytics-click doesn't seem like that's unique to the biz name. Biz name does, right? Where search title, like result title, also does, which it does, right? So we can go off of a few things here. We can go off H3 class search title result, or I can do the A class of biz name. I'm going to do the A class of biz name. So let's try that. And again, this is playing around with it as much as you can and just kind of learning on your own by trial and error. A lot of that stuff, a lot of things in code is about trial and error, but this in particular, you'll really start to learn it once you do it more. So we'll go back and we'll do biz-name, save that. I'm going to go ahead and copy this, paste in here, press enter, and now we've got a lot of biz names in here. So let's go ahead and do a loop through it. So I'll do for name in. Well, we just need this part right here. So I'm going to paste that out, and then we'll print name.text. Let's try and see what that does. Go ahead and copy here, and we're going to paste this out. And there we go. Look at that. We've got Moby's Original Fish Sandwich. So this is again is going off of Newport Beach and the first page. So let's go back into here, and right now we're in New York, so let's change this to Newport Beach, CA, and start equals to 0. Press enter. So the first thing that we should see is probably Moby's Original Fish, and then Patty Max, and so on. Now we see Patty Max, I don't see Moby's, the Beach Barrel, Wild Taco, and so on, right? So what we see here, the bottom one is Boss Cat. So Boss Cat, it's not going to be perfect, right? The requests are not perfect. And it actually might be picking up listings or that same sort of data from somewhere else. It's not necessarily completely only in this search results, which is fine because Moby's Original Fish Sandwich is probably in Newport. So let's go ahead and do a search for it real quick and press enter. Moby's Original Fish Sandwich. And Moby's Original Fish Sandwich, it's actually in Huntington Beach, which is very close to Newport. Not a big deal there. Okay, so it's pulling up some data that's not necessarily that great, but it is pulling up the data. So let's do one more thing, and we'll change the page to being 10. So the next page, that's what it should be. So I'm going to go ahead and copy everything again, because now we have to do a new request. And now what it's going to do is give me a whole new set. We've got Moby's Original Fish Sandwich again for some reason. And then we have Boss Cat again, but we have some new other stuff that's in there. So going back into Yelp, and we go to page 2, we will probably see that stuff. So Mama D's Kitchen, and so on, right? So these results aren't going to be perfectly the same from your browser to your terminal window. The main reason being is that your browser holds cookies and does all sorts of other things that you might not be aware of that your terminal is not going to necessarily do. But it will still open and read stuff, and that's how we're still able to get this data. All right, cool. So that is now parsing and understanding a little bit more about how the URL actually works, and then also understanding a little bit more about how Beautiful Soup actually works. So if we look in here, now let's actually go back in and think about this. This is going to be for the next one. In our search result, what are the different things that we want to look up in here to actually get the data we need? So if we look through each one of these div tags or each one of these tags, eventually we'll find all the data we need. What data are we looking for? I'm looking for the name, the address, and the phone number. Those are the only things that I'm actually going to pull. Everything else that's on here you could pull by doing what we're doing, but I just want those specific things. And then I'm going to want it for a relatively big set of data. So that's what we're going to leave it on. In the next one, we will actually talk about how to do all of those little things. How do we get all of these little individual things? And then also, how do we just put it onto a document at the same time. All right, so we'll see you in the next one.